There's a number that FIFA doesn't want you to think about too hard. 14. That's how many times Kylian Mbappé touched the ball in the first 30 minutes of France's last World Cup group stage match. 14 touches. For the best player on the planet. In the biggest tournament in the world. And here's the part nobody in the football media is saying out loud. That number isn't going to get better in 2026. It's going to get worse. Much worse. Because the World Cup doesn't just have MbappeProblem. The World Cup has always had MbappeProblem. We just weren't ready to admit it yet. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of Mbappe's career, the beginning of the problem. It's 2018. Russia. France are playing Argentina in the round of 16, and the world is about to witness something it hasn't seen in a generation. A 19-year-old with legs that move faster than the human eye can fully process scoring twice against Messi's Argentina, winning a World Cup, before he's old enough to legally drink in most countries, and somehow making all of it look completely inevitable. That's when the mythology started. That's when every football conversation about World Cup 2026 began with the same assumption, that Mbappe would be there, that Mbappe would dominate, that Mbappe would dominate, Super Say would be the tournament. But here's the question nobody asked when they were building that narrative. What does a tournament built around one player actually look like from the inside? The answer starts not in 2026. It starts 3 years earlier, and it starts with a contract. When Mbappe finally made his decision on his club future, the decision that had European football frozen for months, the decision that had every journalist refreshing their timelines every 4 hours, something shifted inside the France national team setup that nobody noticed. The power balance changed. Every elite squad operates on a kind of unwritten hierarchy. There are the leaders, the earners, the veterans, the prospects, and when one player becomes so transcendently dominant, so far ahead of everyone else in terms of global attention, contract value, and public expectation, the architecture of that squad doesn't just stretch, it bends. And a bent structure only holds for so long. Here's what the data shows, and here's why it matters for World Cup 2026. In tournaments, not league seasons, not cup runs, but tournaments, Mbappe's performance is directly tied to one thing that has nothing to do with his talent. It's tied to the question of who else on the France squad is playing well enough to demand attention. When Griezmann is dangerous, Mbappe is devastating. When Dembélé is electric, Mbappe finds the spaces that win games. When France operates as a machine, all 11 parts moving, Mbappe becomes genuinely unstoppable. But when France's supporting cast underperforms, something almost counterintuitive happens. The team doesn't suffer because Mbappe is absent. The team suffers because Mbappe is everywhere. Opponents stop defending their structure and start defending one person. Every defensive system in the world is now built with a specific Mbappe protocol, a pre-constructed blueprint for limiting his influence. And when the rest of France isn't creating enough noise to distract from that blueprint, the blueprint works. Now here is the moment that changes everything for World Cup 2026. Think about the draw. Think about the bracket architecture. Think about which teams France are likely to face in the knockout rounds. Because the 48-team format doesn't just expand the tournament, it changes the road. It creates different matchup sequences. It means France could hypothetically face 3 or 4 elite defensive systems in a row before the semi-final. And elite defensive systems don't fear Mbappe the way they feared him in 2018. They've had 8 years to study him. 8 years of high-definition footage. 8 years of tactical evolution specifically designed to answer the question, how do you play without giving Mbappe a single moment of space? The answer isn't fast anymore. In 2026, the answer is patient, organized, and deeply unspectacular. And it works. Here's where this becomes genuinely complicated. Because the problem isn't that Mbappe won't be extraordinary at World Cup 2026. He will be. The problem is that the tournament is being structured by media, by sponsors, by fan expectation, by the entire cultural weight of modern football around a narrative that only ends one way. Mbappe wins. Mbappe lifts. Mbappe becomes the greatest of his generation in the same way that Pelé did, that Maradona did, that Ronaldo did in 2002. And football doesn't care about your narrative. Football has spent its entire history dismantling the most carefully constructed stories the sport has ever told. Pelé didn't win 1966. Maradona's 1994 ended in a drugs test. Ronaldo played in a World Cup final in 2006 and scored 0 goals. Messi spent 4 World Cups wandering through the tournament without lifting the trophy, and then in 2022 completely rewrote the story in a single tournament. So the question isn't whether Mbappé is good enough. He is. The question is whether the World Cup is structured to let him be good enough. And now we get to the part that FIFA really doesn't want you to think about. The 48-team World Cup 2026 is the first major structural shift to the tournament since 1998. More teams, more matches, a new format with league-style group phases that create mathematical complexity. The old 32-team format never had to manage. More teams means more tactical preparation time, more film sessions, more scouting, more countries who will arrive at the tournament having spent months specifically designing their defensive setup around neutralizing the 2 or 3 players who will win their opponents the most matches. And Mbappe, who is not just the most dangerous player in the world, but the most analyzed player in the world, is going to walk into a tournament where every opponent from the round of 16 onwards will have a specific Mbappe answer ready before the first whistle blows. The question is whether France's system can build a question that has no answer. And right now, based on everything the evidence is pointing toward, the answer to that question is deeply, genuinely unclear. Let's talk about the pressure. Because there's a weight that comes with being the expected story of a tournament, and it is not the same weight as being a genuine underdog or a celebrated veteran. It is its own specific kind of pressure. The pressure of expectation built so high that anything short of the absolute peak reads as failure. Mbappé at World Cup 2022 scored 8 goals. He became the first player since Eusebio in 1966 to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final. He was extraordinary. And he went home without the trophy because one goalkeeper had the match of his life, and football is like that. How did the football world process it? Not as an extraordinary achievement. As a tragedy, as the moment the story didn't end the way it was supposed to. That's the weight Mbappé carries into 2026. Not just the weight of his own ambition, the weight of a sport that has decided his story has a specific ending and will not emotionally accept anything else. And the players who carry that weight into major tournaments, the players who feel an entire cultural expectation pressing down on every single touch, are the players who sometimes in the matches that matter the most, feel the game slightly slower than they should. Here's what no one is saying about the France squad that will arrive at World Cup 2026. They are a team in transition. Not collapse, transition. The generation that won in 28 and is older now. Griezmann is at the end of his international timeline. The players who were supposed to emerge as the second wave, the players who would take the pressure off Mbappe and create the operational freedom he needs, have had mixed results at the elite level, which means France arrive at the biggest tournament in the history of the sport carrying a fundamental structural vulnerability that has nothing to do with talent and everything to do with talent, and everything to do with timing. They need their best player to be at his best, while also being double and triple marked by teams who have spent a year designing systems specifically to make that impossible. And here's the final piece of the puzzle. The piece that makes this not just a France problem or a Mbappe problem, but a World Cup problem. The tournament needs Mbappe, not in a sentimental way, in a commercial, structural, cultural way. The broadcast contracts, the sponsor agreements, the media strategies, the casual fan engagement. Enormous amounts of the 2026 World Cup's commercial infrastructure is quietly built on the assumption that Mbappe will be relevant in the later stages of the tournament. If that doesn't happen, not through injury, not through failure, just through the cold logic of elite defensive football making his impact manageable, the tournament loses its central narrative engine in a way it has never had to face before. Because Messi had his 2022 redemption. Ronaldo had his 2022 farewell. To 2026 World Cup story. To one that was always going to sell the most, generate the most conversation, and define the tournament's legacy, was always supposed to be Mbappe finally lifting the trophy. What happens to the story if he doesn't? What happens to Mbappe if the World Cup turns out to be exactly as complicated as the numbers suggest it might be? What happens to France if the system built around protecting their greatest player isn't actually protecting him from the one thing talent can't solve? Time, expectation, in a world that has spent 8 years learning exactly who he is? What happens to football? To the next generation of players, to African federations, to Asian football programs, to every underdog who arrives at World Cup 2026 believing that this expanded complex unpredictable tournament format finally gives them a genuine chance, if the biggest story of the tournament is the one nobody expected. Because here's the truth about Kylian Mbappé and World Cup 2026. He might be the best player at the tournament. He probably will be. He will have moments that remind the world why the mythology was built in the first place. But the World Cup has never asked whether you are the best player. The World Cup asks whether you can solve a problem that gets bigger every round, with more riding on every single decision, against opponents who are specifically built to make you fail. And right now, the most honest thing football can say is this: nobody knows the answer yet. Not FIFA, not Didier Deschamps, not the analysts, not the algorithms, not even Mbappe. And that uncertainty, that genuine, unresolved, mathematically defensible uncertainty, is the most interesting thing about World Cup 2026 before a single ball has been kicked. Football gave us the question. Now we wait for the answer. And the answer will define everything.